Joe was always the friendliest.
And this is your storyteller, Joybubbles.
Most forthcoming.
There was always something a little bit childlike about him.
And just warmest person you could ever want to talk to.
If you'd like to reach me in Minneapolis, you can call me direct at 612-879.
It's like he was just a kid excited about the world.
And I think May is about my favorite month. For one thing, it's the 5th month, and 5 is my favorite number.
His world was really phones. That was his big thing.
And then besides, my birthday is on the 25th, and that's 5 times 5. How about that?
The first half of his life, he was hacking into the phone.
His genius and his perfect pitch. He was seen as sort of the ultimate phone freak, that you could never be as good as Joe.
Here's the thing, imagine a rotary phone. It's the most boring thing you can think of. It's got a pair of wires that go into the wall. The phone freaks looked at it and said, I want to know how that works.
The second half of his life, when he was Joybubbles, the phone was more about this new identity that he was creating for himself.
And once they figured out how it works, I wonder if you can make it do things that it wasn't designed to do.
The number you have reached, 900.
What happens if I dial a number that's not in the phone book?
Oh, is not in service. Please check the number and dial again.
I love to dial wrong numbers in different countries around the world, and I think tonight, let's see. Yeah, I think I'll dial Armenia.
Joe Engressia was a kid who was born in 1949. He was born blind. Incredibly brilliant child.
I like Armenian. You don't get to hear it too much. Well, here we go for Armenia.
And he also had a sister who was born blind.
And he was, I think, even at that young age, fairly lonely.
38 Fahrenheit, 3 Celsius. At the tone, the time will be...
But the thing he was obsessed more than anything else with was the telephone. He would spend, even by the time he was 3 or 4 years old, he would spend hours on the phone, listening, calling the time lady to find out, to hear what time it was, and just listen to that recording over and over again.
At the tone, the time will be 5-2. Exactly.
In some way, everyone is blind on the phone, right? You don't get to see the facial expressions of the person you're talking to. A phone call is a wonderful auditory experience, and is only an auditory experience. And so in some ways, it's also perhaps sort of a natural habitat if you're sightless.
I'm Rachel Morrison. I'm making a feature-length documentary film about Joybubbles. I think that put a lot of stress on their family to have 2 blind children.
What were you scared of when you were little?
So there was some tension there, I know.
I bet something scared you, because there was things that sure scared me.
There was some domestic violence.
And one of them was when Daddy and Mommy would fight.
His father would beat his mother.
Yeah, Daddy would slam Mother and hurt her and break things, and there'd be things thrown around and lots of scary sounds and stuff at night.
And he talks about picking up the phone and listening to the dial tone.
The soft hum of the dial tone that was always there.
And the telephone became his happy place. It was where he lived.
What a wonderful thing a telephone is, especially during those long nights.
Joe talks about when he was about 7 years old, just being on a long-distance phone call and hearing this tone in the background. He didn't really know what the tone was, and he started whistling along with it. Now, one thing to know about Joe is Joe had perfect pitch, so he could really just mimic any tone perfectly just by whistling, and he could identify any tone just by hearing it. And he just sort of idly started trying to whistle the same tone. And when he whistled the tone, he suddenly heard ka-chink, and the call cut off. And he didn't know why that was. It was really puzzling. And he tried it again, and it cut off again. And pretty soon he had figured out that, wow, if I whistle this one tone, which was 2600 hertz, 7th octave E, he could cut off a phone call. Now you might think, well, what's that useful for?
If he's still holding the receiver up to his face and he's disconnected a call, then the telephone company thinks he's hung up a call, but he's still inside of the telephone network. And so he can then make another telephone call for free without being charged and call anywhere in the world. And that's when he started phreaking. But of course, that word wasn't even invented yet. He didn't know that there were other people who were doing this around the country.
Hi, Bill?
Yeah.
Did you just say if you put a 4 in front of it, it'll wait for star and diamond?
My name is Phil Lapsley, and I'm the author of the book Exploding the Phone. And for about, almost 10 years, I spent time researching phone phreaks and telephone hackers.
That's all it's good for, is checking the frequencies, huh?
Phone phreak is spelled Phreak.
Just a play on the phone, the word phone.
A phone phreak is someone who is obsessively interested in learning about or playing with the telephone network.
What is it, a my box to it, or are we all? Or what?
People who were fascinated and obsessed and had a passion for the intricacies of the AT&T system and the Bell network as it was back in that time.
The call you have made requires a 25-second.
You wanted to see what you could do and how far you could go and just what you could accomplish.
Phone phreaking was kind of a predecessor to computer hacking.
Oh, that's cute.
Another definition of phone phreaking, which is also accurate, is making free phone calls.
In my mind, anything at all that you did that was beyond the scope of just picking up the phone and dialing a call was in the realm of phone phreaking.
By the time Joe got to college, he had figured out what he called whistle dialing, which was, it turned out if you could whistle this tone, not only could you disconnect a phone call, but then you could actually place a phone call.
One day he was talking to another student and asking if they would read him like a technical book about the telephone, and they were like, well, why would you want me to do this? And he was like, well, I can make a long distance call for free.
And they said, nah, that's not true, you can't do that. And he said, I'll bet you $1 I can. And he proceeded to whistle a free phone call for somebody at University of South Florida. And pretty soon, this became the thing.
This is really hard to do. It sounded like all the tones were present, so the phone should be ringing about now.
The word quickly spread around campus that this blind student could whistle long-distance calls for free.
He talked about how there would be crowds of people following him around on campus because everybody wanted a free phone call, and it was pretty cool to see the blind kid whistle these free calls. And so he became, kind of Mr. Popular on campus for a little bit because of that.
So he became kind of a media sensation.
His one phone to a town in Illinois and back to his other phone. 1,000-mile phone call by whistling.
And that's when they started calling him the Whistler. My name is Fred Belton. Back in the day of phone phreaking, I used to call myself Jack. It was actually short for Jack the Ripoff. When I met him, he was living in an apartment in Memphis. His apartment was pretty sparsely furnished, but there was a lot of phone stuff in there. Sometimes we would just get on the phone and make calls, listen to the way calls went through to different exchanges and things like that. A few times we played phone tricks on people.
When we got really creative, and maybe had a few beers, we might call recently divorced couples. Both of their phones would ring at the same time, and they both pick up. Or what did you want? Well, I didn't call you, you called me. And of course, then the fireworks would start. Or we might call a liquor store and a Mormon church.
It was really amazing the kinds of play that phone phreaks would get up to in terms of just goofing around with the telephone network. People say that the telephone network at the time was the largest machine in the world, and they basically got to kind of make it do things that it wasn't intended to do.
We might route our call through as many different tandems and satellites as we could and call the phone right next to us and see how much of a delay there was.
So that when I pick up the phone on this side and I say hello, my voice goes all the way around the world and comes out on the other side.
And we hear it coming back 20 seconds later, hello! So that's how long it took for the voice to get around the world.
Listen to the echo. Echo? Echo. Ben, how are you?
People like Joe and Captain Crunch, they would just try to route their call from here to here to here to here to the next place, and stack or through as many different towns as they could.
Stand by.
And when they did that, when the call was eventually broken, it was quite spectacular.
And now, here's the disconnect.
There would be this long series. You could hear the connection being broken through each tandem, and you would hear like ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk.
And it's really quite a lovely thing to listen to.
Wow.
All hands on deck! Pirates off the port bow!
I'm John Draper, also known as Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch, delightfully sweet.
John Draper, who went by the phone freak handle Captain Crunch, was one of the best-known phone freaks. And he was actually the first phone freak who ended up in federal prison for his phone freaking.
I'd heard about this blind kid that could whistle perfect pitch and make phone calls with his mouth. Didn't even have to use a Captain Crunch whistle. And I said, wow, this guy's good. And that's how I met Joe.
Joe had told me that Captain Crunch was going to be visiting and asked if I would like to come over and meet him. As far as I was concerned, Joe and Captain Crunch were like the two biggest names in phone freaking. I thought, wow, to actually meet both of these guys, and I was hoping to learn something about making a blue box from Captain Crunch.
So I go to Memphis. Cabby took me over to his place, and that's where I met Joe for the first time. He was kind of heavy, a little overweight, very friendly, very naive, very friendly, with a southern drawl accent. He's like a kid, you know, he acts like a kid.
It turned out that he didn't want to talk about phones in Joe's apartment because he was afraid it might be bugged. And so we decided to go swimming in the apartment pool.
So we went down to the pool, and Joe was talking about elevators and things like that. He likes to play with elevators.
And once we got out there, we splashed around in the pool for the afternoon.
And he showed me some tricks on the phone. Didn't actually make any illegal calls, of course, because he was being watched.
And that's when we talked about blue box designs.
I am Jim Petgatherer, and originally I am from San Jose, California. A blue box can take many forms and shapes, but it's a device. It can be a very small device.
People would often describe it as about the size of a pack of cigarettes.
It would have what we might call an audio coupler that would attach to the telephone mouthpiece, like a suction cup, just something to hold it on there.
And it had a little keypad on it, kind of like a touch-tone keypad.
There would be one that was labeled KP, which stood for key pulse, one that was labeled ST, which stood for start, and then there were the numbers 0 through 9. And then there was a button to produce 2600 cycle tone.
Yeah, this was just a bunch of oscillators connected together, mixed together with an operational amplifier.
And so you would just go to a payphone, maybe called airline or hotel 800 number, which would not bill you.
Now that's a free call, so you're being billed at 0 cents per minute.
And I put the speaker up to the mouthpiece of the phone.
Touch the key for 2600 on the blue box.
And I hear the ka-chink sound. I said, oh my God, this stuff works.
You've just rerouted your call to anywhere in the world.
I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, it actually works. Crazy, man.
Till tonight. All conferences are the same. Except this one, I think, is a little bit more elegant.
In October 1971, Esquire magazine published an article by Ron Rosenbaum called Secrets of the Little Blue Box, about a bunch of blind kids and sighted kids all playing with the telephone network, all goofing around, making free phone calls, hacking the telephone system.
Anything happen? Hey, watch it. Ray, yeah? Okay.
We had a bunch of phone freaks. We had blue boxes, black boxes, recordings, all over the kitchen table. And this guy from Esquire was there. And I was Ralph in the article, and the article said something like, Ralph's parents don't really know what he does with the phone, but they're happy that he has a hobby that keeps him off the streets.
One of the people who talked about, he said, well, you know, I read this magazine. It was on my mom's coffee table. I got so excited because I realized, like, these were people like me. They were engineers, and they could do all these amazing things, and I had to call my best friend at the time, and I had to tell him, we have to do this. This is so awesome. The guy who was reading the article was Steve Wozniak, and his best friend was Steve Jobs. And so together, long before they started Apple Computer, their first technology project together was learning how to build a blue box, how to become phone freaks, and Steve Jobs later said, if there had not been a blue box, there never would have been an Apple Computer.
You know how I love phones. Well, there was rows of them, and I'd get to go back there and learn about new exchanges and listen to phone lines and all that kind of stuff. And there was as many phones, more phones than I could imagine.
Getting a job with a phone company had been Joe's dream since he was a small child. He used to talk about how when he was 3 or 4 years old, he would just sing over and over again in a sing-song voice, I'm a telephone man forever, I'm a telephone man forever. I mean, he was obsessed with the phone.
I woke up at night, dialed on the phone, and then told the phone company about when something was wrong with the phone, and they got it fixed for me and stuff like that.
In 1977, at Denver, Joe began actually working for the Bell system at Mountain Bell, the telephone company, as a network troubleshooter there.
And he was making good money also, and he lived in a high-rise apartment building with a swimming pool, which was sort of a dream of his. So he had been known as Joe Engressia, but now everybody was calling him High-Rise Joe.
Joe's job was to ferret out problems in the network and fix them. And the way he did this was by using all of his phone freak skills. As a phone freak, he had learned a lot about how, not just how the network was supposed to work, but how it actually worked.
We're sorry, but because of a temporary...
We, listen to test numbers and all kinds of stuff. We dial the system, dial in, and, we find them. We know how,
And more important, how it sounded.
We know how to listen and what to listen for and can tell where the trouble is and know how to get it fixed.
He talked about wearing the Bell System jacket and feeling the patch on his breast of the Bell System insignia and feeling like he was the luckiest guy in the world. He was doing the job that he had always wanted.
This was the business card of a security agent with South Central Bell in Memphis, and he and his partner came over to my house one day.
Once the Esquire story came out, the cat was out of the bag, right? It's in a national magazine that this is doable. So in a lot of ways, you can think of this as the phone company's worst nightmare.
And it was the chief special agent from the phone company, and he said, well, Jim, why don't you sit down and tell me about what are these phone freaks of America? What is that all about? So he knew what I was doing.
And so the phone company, starting around 1972-73, really shifted gears to simply a strategy of prosecution. Anytime we find somebody making free phone calls, anytime we find somebody doing something untoward with our network, we're going to prosecute them to the full extent of the law.
While they were talking to my parents, I was running around the house hiding everything I had about phone freaking. The black box I took and threw out the window, and I hid all my written information about it.
A repeat offender would, face the prospects and possibility of doing serious time.
I was the kingpin.
Which did happen with some people.
I was the person to get.
Mainly Captain Crunch.
I was criminal number one.
Who did 3 or 4 years in Lompoc, I think is where he was.
The FBI monitored my phone line for a while. And I was doing some testing. I didn't make free calls. I was just doing some testing. And they put a pen register on the line, and it registered. They said, we got him. So on my way back from class, I got picked up by the FBI. That was how I got busted.
Hello. Oh, I love the word hello. That's one of my favorite words, I think, because it reminds me of one of my favorite things, the telephone.
After Joe left working for the telephone company in 1980, he worked a number of different odd jobs, And he ended up on June 12th, 1982, that is 612, he ended up moving to the city of Minneapolis, which happens to have area code 612, because he felt it was a good number. He liked that number, and he thought that good things were going to happen there. He had a good feeling about it.
You read stories and stuff here in Minneapolis, the land of cold winters and warm hearts.
And one of the things that he started doing was running a telephone line called Stories and Stuff.
Sometimes stories, sometimes stuff.
I mean, it's sort of like an early podcast in a way.
Over at my place every Christmas, my imaginary friend and a bunch of her friends' come, lots of them, because Christmas is, it's just about the quietest day of the year for me. And Emily friend said, why don't you call the phone company and just, set up a phone line to tell, like, stories and stuff. And I don't know, somehow the name Stories and Stuff just stuck.
During this time, Engressia started making a couple of changes to his life. These were big changes. One of them was that he decided to rename himself Joybubbles.
It's all one word, Joybubbles. It's not joy or bubbles or anything like that. It's Joybubbles, a 10-letter word, and only the J is capitalized.
The other thing was he realized that he had never really had a proper childhood.
Obviously, a lot of stuff happened to him back at that time.
It was a blind school, a school for the blind, a Catholic school in New Jersey, back in the fall of 1955.
I got the impression there were some aspects of his childhood that were pretty unhappy.
A lot of the nuns whipped me and my sister really hard, and shook us. They'd whip us and with things, metal things and stuff, and it would, scabs and bruises and things like that. Shook us real hard.
He had started to sort of focus on this memory of being sexually abused by a nun at a school for the blind when he was a kid.
Only one did the sexual abuse, along with the bad touching.
And was thinking that he had been robbed of his childhood and lost his childhood.
She would pick me up and put me on the table, and then she would go close the door. I think one of the things I remember most is the sound of that door closing.
And so as he started to think about this, he decided eventually that he would declare himself to be the age of 5 forever so that he could go back and relive what he felt he had missed out on.
I realize that this might sound kind of bizarre, the idea of wanting to be a 5-year-old, and I think it really came from a place of complete innocence on Joe's part.
Play became very important to him. He felt like he didn't have enough time to just play and sort of be himself when he was a kid. Telling those stories, I think it was like a healing process for him.
This is one of the hardest things I've ever done. Next week, the regular stories will resume. Call back then. Bye now.
At the tone, please record a voice message. Press the pound key when finished.
I really think we owe a lot to the phone phreaks. To paraphrase the Apple ad, the phone phreaks taught us to think different, right? They taught us to look at something and to be curious about it and to try something different and new, to try and make something that had not been there before.
It was this big, mysterious network, and it was exploring unknown territory. I guess that was the way to describe it.
That's all it's good for, is checking the frequencies.
It was like a social network. It was like meeting people, both locally and worldwide, who shared a common interest.
And it was sort of exciting knowing that you were doing something a little outside of the law, too.
But sometimes it was very serious. Like when someone got busted. The terror ran through the community.
I have this friend, her name's Cynthia, she lives in Tennessee. She called me one day and said that she was listening to NPR and said that she started hearing something about Joybubbles, and heard him referred to in the past tense, and she said, "Oh no, I think I know what this is," and it turned out it was about his death. And so she called me immediately.
He passed away in 2007. I think the coroner's report said congestive heart failure. He passed away in his apartment. It was big enough news that the New York Times ran an obituary about him.
And his friends and family put together a telephonic memorial service for him. It was a large conference call that went on for about 4 hours with people just giving their tributes to the man and how he had touched them and what he had meant to them.
Oh yeah, I value knowing Joe a lot. I mean, he was just a nice guy to be around. He was very, I would go over and see him sometime just, not necessarily to talk about phreaking, but just because I like to hang out with him.
I think he was an amazing storyteller, and I think his stories are incredibly uplifting.
And by the way, before I go, if you'd like an imaginary friend, a bunch of them come that are just looking for somebody to love and play with and talk to, and they'll be with you for as long as you want them, as long as you need them, for a lifetime and beyond.
He's someone who I think because of his life circumstances had, reason to be upset, maybe disgruntled, sad, angry, but he embraced life. He was a very spiritual person.
I'm so glad to be able to have stories and stuff for 11 years and maybe 12 and many more.
And then just the power of imagination. For me, that's the story, the power of imagination.
Stay strong and take care of each other and take time to play. And get yourself one of these imaginary friends. They'd be so happy. Maybe you will too. Bye for now.